Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tackling a really big, kind of controversial idea from a pretty influential book. So today we're diving into this really fascinating and honestly pretty provocative theory of history from this very book. The core idea? It suggests the future might be way more predictable than you think. And no, not because of some crystal ball, but because of a repeating pattern that's been hiding in plain sight, deep in our past.
All right, so the authors kick things off by tapping into a feeling that might seem super familiar, especially today. You know, that sense that despite all our progress, something just feels off.
No, get this. They wrote this all the way back in 1997. They described a society with fading trust in its institutions, these really deep cultural arguments, and just a general anxiety that the whole country was, well, coming apart at the seams. Does any of that sound familiar to you?
And that's what leads to the book's central and kind of radical question. What if this feeling isn't new? What if history isn't just a straight line of progress or, just a random series of chaotic events? What if it has a rhythm, a hidden pulse that we can actually learn to recognize?
So what is this hidden rhythm they're talking about? Well, Strauss and Howe argue that history isn't just one random thing after another. No, they believe it has a predictable cycle, a cycle that literally shapes the entire mood and direction of society.
They compare it to the seasons of a year. So just like we have spring, summer, fall, and winter, they say history has 4 distinct moods, or what they call turnings. And this whole cycle, all 4 turnings, lasts about the length of a long human life. We're talking roughly 80 to 100 years. To give this full cycle a name, the authors actually borrowed an ancient Roman term, the saculum. The easiest way to think about it is like one of history's great years. It has its own spring, its own summer, autumn, and winter, all wrapped up in that 80 to 100-year span.
Okay, so let's actually break this cycle down. We'll start with the first 2 seasons of history, what they call society's spring and summer.
The cycle always starts with what's called a high. And this is exactly like a societal spring. Imagine a major crisis has just ended. Society feels energized. It feels united. Institutions are strong. Individualism is kind of weak. And everyone's focused on working together, building things, achieving common goals. It's really an era of confidence and consensus.
But after spring comes summer, right? So next up is the awakening. During this time, all that conformity and discipline from the high, well, it starts to feel pretty stifling. The focus shifts away from the group and zooms in on the individual. This leads to a passionate, often turbulent, era of spiritual and cultural rebellion. People start challenging the old order, searching for personal meaning and authenticity.
All right, so we've had spring and summer. Now let's get to society's autumn and winter, which is where this whole cycle really builds to its dramatic conclusion.
The third stage is the unraveling, and you can think of this as society's autumn. Individualism is now at its absolute peak, but here's the problem. The institutions that are supposed to hold society together are getting weaker. They're decaying. And this is what leads to that familiar feeling of pessimism, cynicism, and this sense that the culture is just fragmenting into a million pieces.
And that brings us to the final season, the crisis, or societal winter. All that decay from the unraveling has left society incredibly vulnerable. And then a major threat hits. It could be economic, political, military, you name it. And it forces everyone to band together. The old, failing system gets torn down, and through some really tough trials and sacrifice, a whole new civic order is forged. And that sets the stage for the next spring to begin. So here's the really crucial point. These 4 turnings always follow in the exact same order. You get the high, then the awakening, then the unraveling, and finally the crisis. It creates this predictable rhythm of social growth, rebellion, decay, and then, ultimately, rebirth, over and over again. Okay, so this might all sound a bit abstract, but check out this timeline. It makes the whole theory a lot more concrete. The authors point to a cycle that many people in the 20th century actually lived through. It kicks off with the unraveling of the Roaring '20s. That's followed by the huge crisis of the Great Depression and World War II. And what comes after that crisis? The post-war American high, which was then challenged by the awakening of the counterculture in the 60s and 70s. You can see the pattern, right?
So naturally, this whole framework leads to a pretty provocative question, doesn't it? If history really does move in these seasons, which one are we living through right now?
And this is where the book gets really prophetic. Remember, they were writing this way back in 1997. And based on their calculations, they predicted that the unraveling era, which they said began in the 1980s, was due to end, and that it would set the stage for the next societal winter, a new crisis that would begin sometime right around the year 2005.
And look, the stakes of a fourth turning, they couldn't be higher. We're not just talking about a tough decade or a bad recession. According to this theory, it is a fundamental moment of both destruction and creation. It's a time when the nation's very survival is on the line and the outcome, well, the outcome literally determines the shape of society for the next 80 years.
Now, it's important to remember, the theory doesn't claim to predict these specific events of a crisis. It can't tell you what's going to happen tomorrow. It only predicts the timing and the intensity, that a societal winter is coming. And that leaves us all with a pretty challenging final thought, right? If you know a massive storm is on the horizon, that knowledge doesn't stop the storm from coming, but it changes absolutely everything about how you prepare for it.